So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dick Fleming. For over 30 years, Dick Fleming has been a civic entrepreneur engaged in private sector and civic initiatives to revitalize center cities and metropolitan communities and economies in Atlanta, Denver, and of course in St. Louis. He has served as a president and chief executive officer of the RCGA since 1994. And you recall, we're a 174-year-old chamber, the bi-state region's largest and oldest chamber of commerce and economic development organization, to which he was recruited from Denver. And Dick represents a diverse 125-member board of directors that includes the CEOs, the chief elected officers, and university chancellors in the region, and oversees a staff of 50 with an annual operating budget of over $11 million. He announced earlier this year that he will step down from his current position at the end of the year and plans to pursue the next chapter of his career in the philanthropic sector. And that's, of course, why we asked Dick to speak to us today, because the end of the year is coming up quickly. Mr. Fleming was recruited to Denver in August 1980, following 4 years as a sub-cabinet member at Housing and Urban Development in Washington, D.C. In Denver, he served for 14 years, both as the founding president and chief executive officer of the Downtown Denver Partnership, and then as the president and chief executive officer of both the Greater Denver Chamber of Commerce and the Greater Denver Corporation, where he led the private sector's role in the revitalization of the Denver economy, the development of the Denver International Airport, recruitment of Major League Baseball in Denver, and the development and implementation of the Downtown Area Plan, and the recruitment of 240,000 net new jobs within that region. Nationally, Dick is past chairman of the board of directors of the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives. He's the current chairman of Partners for Livable Communities, as well as the chairman of the Alliance for Regional Stewardship on their board of advisors. He's a Neil Pierce City States Associate, a longtime active executive council member of the Urban Land Institute, and is past chairman of the International Downtown Association. He's also a partner in the Brookings Institute's Blueprint for American Prosperity and is active with CEO for Cities. And he is the founding board chairman of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund-sponsored Climate Prosperity Project, of which I know he's very proud of that. Dick holds an undergraduate degree from Loyola College in Political Science and Philosophy, MBA from the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School of Finance and Commerce, and a master's degree in the City and Regional Planning from the University of Pennsylvania, their Graduate School of Fine Arts. So please help me in welcoming our colleague and friend, Dick Fleming.
Well, I was just telling Pennekamp, it doesn't seem like 17 years. The first day on this job, he was the first person I met. And that explains a lot, doesn't it? No, it was pretty prophetic. John Barasiewicz was on the search committee that recruited me, and knowing that I was starting on a particular day it was either July or August, he said, "I don't know if you've got a schedule yet, but I'd like to introduce you to some people in Illinois." And I spent my first day playing in the Leadership Council's golf tournament. I also learned something about the region when I got to the office the next day. I spent 7 hours with these guys. I thought Illinois was the center of the region at the end of that, and I was asking for various materials, and I asked among that for a map, and I rolled out this map, and the then 8-county SMSA only had 4 counties on the map, and they were all in Missouri. And my question to our research director at the time, Tim, was how the hell can we have a map of the region that only shows half of the region? So I think we've come a little ways since then, but we still need to work on that. But it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity today to share some thoughts and perspectives. I guess I should start by thanking Francis and his blogger for the turnout. Seriously, I am pleased to have had the opportunity and continue to have the opportunity to be both a friend and a civic colleague with Francis and his predecessors, Mayor Harmon and Freeman Bosley and the late Buzz Westfall and Charlie. Alan Dunstan and Mark Kern, and the guy who I think still gets the game ball for regionalism in this town in the 17 years I've been working at it is John Barasiewicz, who I know he's doing great work as a judge, but I miss him. And Steve Ellman has emerged as a tremendous regional leader, and I know we have many other county executives, county chairs, mayors, city managers. Mark is one of the first people that we worked with when we began economic development activity when I got here. So when Jim asked me to be your luncheon speaker today, I jumped at it because among the things that I am most proud of what we have done as an organization and what we have done with our partners in this community, I am proudest of what the network and the regional economic development effort represents. And I would certainly be remiss if I didn't thank the terrific folks on this staff, starting with Steve and Jim and Linda and the whole team of economic development. Linda Leonard was the first person I hired, and she's done a great job in her tenure here, and she has been a strong partner, I know, with this network since its founding. And it also started a great tradition because we admired the work of Steve in Kansas City, and after we got tired of competing against him long enough, we finally persuaded him to come here. As Jim said, as I conclude my role here, and I'm hoping and looking forward to continue to work in economic development and community development, but do it from another perspective, from the philanthropic perspective. And I'm pretty excited about the potentials of that. And as Jim said, I've spent the last 3 years working pretty closely with the foundation community at the national level, and particularly the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation and that Climate Prosperity Project. But as I thought about a message that I'd like to share as I conclude my role here at the end of this year with this group of regional leaders and economic development leaders, I thought about it, and I thought two sort of things I'd like to share with you. No economic developer worth their salt would ever give a speech without a story, so I'll tell a story. And then I'd just like to reflect a little bit on the 17 years here and the 14 years that, and we're not going to be here all afternoon to do that, by the way, the 14 years that preceded and the opportunity that I had to work in this area in Denver. And I also meant to thank Mike Kearney, who in the recent iterations of the network has ably been the chair of this effort. Mike, we appreciate the leadership that you've given. So the story, and the moral of the story, as economic developers know, never, ever become not aware of opportunity. So the setting is this. We're doing our second economic development fundraising capital campaign. And like we've done here, we had a firm that worked with us to sort of qualify the leads and had the staff work it to a point. And on some of the larger deals, I would be asked to go meet with the company and try to close their commitment. So we had a company that the group surfaced that was a 3,500 employee company that no one had ever heard of. And they weren't a member of the chamber. They were in one of the outer counties in the metropolitan area, very quiet, successful company. Northwest Transport's the name of the company. And the data sheet that I was given before this meeting said that based on their size, that they would be a $100,000 investor relative to what per year of what other investors were doing. And I thought, yeah, somebody's really being optimistic here. They're not even a member of the chamber, and we're going to ask him for $500,000 for a 5-year commitment. So I sent the note to the CEO before the meeting, and with a package of the prospectus and whatnot, I got to the meeting. His name is Jerry McMorris at Northwest Transport. I get into the meeting, and this is in This is in 1989, and we're in the throes of finally, at the end of 31 years of trying to bring Major League Baseball to Denver, we're in the hunt for one of the expansion franchises. And the chamber is really up to their ears in it. And so that's something that we're trying to be opportunistic about when the potential exists. And we have an election. This meeting was in May, and the election was in August. And the election was to create a 6-county, 10th of a cent sales tax district to fund the capital for what became Coors Field. And we had done that in the arts. By the way, we copied it from St. Louis in terms of the Zoo Museum District. We did it with sales taxes on a metro basis. So going to the meeting, and I start to make my pitch, and Jerry McMorris says, you know, I've read your stuff. This is great. I really like it, and I don't mean to be rude, but you know, you don't have to sell me. We want to be in this. Tell me what we can do. And I said, well, first of all, shame on us. You've never been asked to be a member of the chamber, and you know, based on your size, you'd be such and such. I forget what the number was, $20,000, $30,000. And he said, yeah. And I said, and what we need in economic development, we'd like your personal involvement because our major investors are part of our board. And your relative number, based on the size of your organization, I was ready to duck when I said it, is $100,000. And he said, is that a year or is that over 5 years? And I thought, oh boy. I said, yeah, it's a year. He said, well, you got it. Do you want 2 checks or 1? Holy cow. And I'm not making any of this story up. This is a Rocky Mountain News guy wrote a book on the recruitment of the Rockies, and he has this in his book as a historic fact. So I said, this is great, and I talked a little bit more about some of the things we were doing in economic development. And I said, you have another minute? He said, sure. I said, well, happens that we're really helping the baseball effort, and we had persuaded, a couple of us had persuaded the head of the Republican Party and the head of the Democratic Party, who had never done anything together, to co-chair the campaign for the election. And to do that, I promised them I'd help them raise the money for the campaign. So I took these opportunities to, and I intended, if everything went well, to ask him for $5,000 towards the campaign. But this was going very well, and I said, you know, we're now up to 31 years. We've got, we're right on the brink of it. Uberoth was the commissioner. Uberoth has said the remaining factors are baseball-only stadium. That's why we're having this election. We're going to have to demonstrate we can do that. And we have to have a satisfactory ownership group, and unfortunately the owner of the minor league franchise was the biggest slumlord in town. Everyone hated him. He was cheap. We knew he would be unacceptable to Major League Baseball, so we eventually going to have to find an owner as well. And he said, my God, this is so timely. I can't believe how timely this. His brother was sitting in the meeting. He said, Jeff and I just had breakfast this morning to talk about this. Who in the world is in charge? Is the mayor in charge? Is the governor in charge? Is the chamber in charge? We want to help this thing. We're frustrated. We're the biggest baseball fans in the world. So the more he talked, the number 5 went to 15 in my mind. And I said, and I'm not making this up, I said, well, you've been very generous. Please don't think this is piggish of me to make this request. But we need to pass this election. Would 15 be something you would consider? And he drew a breath, and he said, absolutely. He said, no, understand, we're not Coors. Coors is our biggest customer. If you were asking for $100 million, I'd have to think about it. But 15, I'll commit it right now. And I said to myself, oh my God. So this poor Irish kid from Baltimore, my mother taught me, you know, never push it once you got it. So I thanked him, and I left, and I got to my car. And I called the governor. It was Roy Romer at the time. I said, Roy, you're not going to believe this. And I told him the story I just told. And he says, you're right, I don't believe it. I think you're crazy. I said, here's this guy's direct line. For God's sake, call him right now and call me back to make sure I'm not hallucinating. He called me back 5 minutes later. He said, son of a bitch, Fleming, we got our first owner. Well, What subsequently happened, Romer, kind of a populist sort of guy, he declares in the Wall Street Journal, if you want to own a piece of a Major League Baseball team, show up at the Westin Hotel in downtown St. Louis on such and such afternoon. And this gang from Ohio with names of Antonucci and Monas and so on, and they were affiliated with the guy that used to own the 49ers, DeBartolo. They ended up coming in with a big pot of money and became the major owners. So they got the managing role of the deal. But McMorris was smart enough to put in his $15 million investment the contingency that at his sole discretion he could buy out all the rest of the owners without their permission. And they agreed to it. So fast forward a couple of months, we're about to start spring training. Oh, the election passed. The version of our economic development program gave a $75,000 soft loan to the commission that was going to be created for the stadium district. They hired HOK. They did a model. The polls switched when people saw what it was going to look like. But we're ready to have spring training, and I opened the Wall Street Journal one morning, and it says far more indictments pending in Ohio. Oh my God! And it's the guys, these guys, and you could see it now. Well, you know, we're innocent until proven guilty. We did nothing. You could see all that. Major League Baseball would give the franchise to somebody else. Jerry McMorris. I called the governor and I called the mayor that morning, got everybody back to meet. By that time, it was Fay Vincent was the commissioner. And McMorris said to me at the end of that day, you realize if I hadn't misunderstood your question, I'd just saved myself another $100 million. He bought the rest of the team. So I'll end that story with, at the end of the first season, we were playing in Mile High Stadium for the first 2 years while Coors Field was being built, 76,000 capacity. The scoreboard was flashing at the end of the last game. Thank you, Colorado. Thank you, Denver. All-time Major League record, 4.2 million fans. And I walked up to him and tugged his shirt, and I said, aren't you glad you misunderstood the question? And he said, you're damn right. So anyway, that's the story part. So let me get a little more serious. What you all represent is I think what is the best example of regionalism that we have in this community. And as I wind down my role here, I'd like to reflect a little bit, and I'd like to urge you and challenge you to continue the ethic that you represent in terms of regional cooperation as things go forward here. And I'll do that by kind of doing a little bit of compare and contrast of the experience just before I came here and the experience that I have had in the time that since I came in August of '94. I was recruited here at the time as Earl Harbison, who was president of Monsanto at the time and the chairman of RCGA, and Andy Craig, who was the head of Boatman's, as you may recall. And Earl and Richard will remember this, had persuaded Andy to head up a new regional effort called the Greater St. Louis Economic Development Council within the RCGA to really bring a much more regional level of activity to economic development. And so I had been recruited in that context, and what I immediately reflected on when I got here was the interesting parallel that existed to what I found in Denver. I had, as Jim said, I was recruited at Denver to be the founding CEO of the Downtown Partnership, and my chairman of that for 2 years. By 6 years into that, had become chairman of the chamber. And in a period of about 15 months, Mayor Pena defeated a 16-year incumbent mayor. Dick Lamb did not run again after 12 years as governor, and he hated economic development and was very bad for economic development. He was a good guy, but he was terrible for economic development. And Roy Romer succeeded him, who was a very pro-economic development Democrat. And I succeeded a gentleman who had been the head of the chamber for 22 years. And we had just gone through the most wrenching economic downturn in 50 years in Colorado, the energy bust. We led the nation in housing foreclosures. We had 35% vacancy of Class A space in downtown on a base of 27 million square feet. There were, articles in the newspapers about see-through buildings. Our economic development competitors were running third-of-page ads in the Wall Street Journal with the person running in sweating with their tie ajar to a board meeting saying, sorry I'm late, but I had to come through the Denver airport, which was just congested as heck. And worse than that, we had a total Balkan states approach to economic development, where individual economic developers fought with one another, competed with one another, took negative ads out in the region against one another as well as nationally, and marketed against one another. And we actually had the mayor of a 250,000 size city, 250,000 person city, Aurora, stand on the steps of City Hall with a national site consultant and look across the street and tell that site consultant how polluted the air was over there in Denver, as though that didn't cross the street. So at the time, what we had was a big challenge, and our economic developers were fighting over the crumbs rather than recognizing that the real economic development opportunities and the real competition was around the country and around the world. So back then, under some interesting parallels, some leadership of some very visionary Denver leaders, the then head of what is now the Wells Fargo Bank, who led the chamber, it's the chairman who, at the time I was recruited, a fellow who would be virtually the parallel to Danny Ludeman, the CEO of Betcher and Company, took on the role of creating and being the first chair of the Greater Denver Corporation. And the parallel to Tom Voss, the head of what was then called Public Service of Colorado, Del Hock, who was in the on-deck circle to be the chair of the chamber and became very passionate about this whole notion of we've got to get past the way we're doing economic development. We have to start working together. And fortunately, we also had our counterpart to Steve Johnson, a fellow named Tom Clark, who some of you may know, who I had the pleasure of working with in the nearly 7 years that I was at the chamber. So that combination of people and I got together and set in motion with a handful. We called ourselves the Crazy Eight. So there were 7 other economic developers. You could kind of name the ones that would be here that would be the counterparts. And we went through peace negotiations for several months. And Steve McConaughey, who was chairing what was the fledgling Greater Denver Corporation that we were creating from the whole cloth, got a sufficient level of buy-in from the business community that said, we will get serious about this and we will raise a major fund that is going to be competitive for economic development, but we will only do it if the infighting stops and we have a structure in which we're going to do economic development collaboratively, where we're going to manage deals, we're going to look at the customer and see where the customer can be met. And if the customer's needs can be met on an inbound in 25 places, then we'll show them 25 places. And the customer will help us sort that out. And if it's an existing company that's looking and they're in play nationally, we're going to establish a protocol on how we're going to do that. And at that time, what became called the Metro Denver Network, it still exists today, represented something of a revolutionary premise in economic development. Revolutionary one in which the Regional Chamber and Economic Development Organization was absolutely agnostic as to the jurisdiction in which deals would go, that they marketed the entire region, that they served as an honest broker on neutral ground, and as a one-stop shop for the region, and which was, most importantly, done in a strong professional partnership with state and local economic developers. The business community bought it, and the business community went out and raised, at the time, an unprecedented set of capital resources to support the effort. The network was welcomed by the community. The then editor of the Denver Post, Bill Hornby, would ultimately salute the network in a Sunday editorial as the economic development equivalency of an arms agreement, and went on to praise the logic of it. And by the way, he ultimately joined the board. If you can imagine having a working journalist on the board, never violated a confidence in the entire 7 years he was on the board. He was kind of the senior statesman in the journalism world. He got so into it when the Greater Denver Corporation finished its 7-year run. He wrote a 175-page book on the Greater Denver Corporation, which is a great read if you're interested in economic development. But most importantly, what did it do? It doubled deal flow, doubled the close rate, and over a period of the 7 years of the Greater Denver Corporation campaigns, the GDC, the Chamber, and the regional partners in the network recruited and added a net 240,000 jobs to the 6-county region. We were successful also in unifying the region around several major civic initiatives, ranging from 2 successful elections that enabled the construction of a $5 billion new international airport that subsequently has been credited with generating 90,000 of those 240,000 jobs. Resolving a 7-year battle among developers on where to locate the new convention center and financing it. The passage of the first general obligation bond issue in 35 years, passed by 71%, to basically fund the elements of the downtown area plan, which the entire region got behind. And then finally, as I referenced in my Jerry McMorris story, to the successful creation by getting it through the legislature and then passage by the voters of 2 successful 6-county sales tax funding districts, one for arts and scientific institutions, and the second one that ultimately produced Gorse Field and the new Mile High Stadium. Suffice it to say, the network has been emulated in several other communities, not the least of which is here. Fast forward to August '94, when I was recruited here by Mr. Harbison and Mr. Craig, with a mandate to get beyond the Balkan states environment that existed in St. Louis, one in which one jurisdiction actually publicly bragged about their successful economic development metrics consisted of how many jobs in the preceding year they managed to recruit out of the city of St. Louis. When I heard that, I suggested that didn't seem to be a very sustainable business plan. And the fact, as I said, where the regional map of St. Louis only included half of the region. Following through on Harbison's and Craig's mandate, and with the support of then St. Louis Mayor Freeman Bosley, St. Louis County Executive Buzz Westfall, and St. Clair County Board Chairman John Barasiewicz, as well as CEOs and board members from RCGA and Civic Progress, and a similar core to the core of the Crazy 8 in Denver of our local economic development partners here. In early '95, we put together a similar approach to the GDC and to the Metro Denver network in the form of the network that you all represent and in what we now call Greater St. Louis, Inc. within the RCGA. Our first effort, led by Andy Craig, set a goal that Andy kind of took a big gulp when we told him what the number was that we're going to try to raise, which was $10 million, and he was so effective, he raised 12. There was a real appetite for such an approach. We began to get past the Balkan state approach to economic development, starting in '95, and continuing through the subsequent chairmanships of these efforts within RCGA by David Kemper, by the late Ray Holman and the late Joe Haston, by Joe Ems, Rich McClure, and now under the leadership of Danny Ludeman and the just concluded campaign in his role as head of economic development at RCGA and chair of the Board of Trustees of Greater St. Louis, Inc., raising $22.5 million in the campaign we've just concluded. I suggest it's important to the future of this region to continue the collaborative ethic of the Greater St. Louis Economic Development Network and the role that the RCGA has played as a partner in that effort and as an honest broker on neutral ground. We intend to, and I certainly know our board does, and I fully expect the level and the caliber of the individual who the search committee and our board will ultimately name to succeed me in this role, will continue to partner with economic development organizations throughout both Missouri and Illinois through this network. And it's really heartening, as you introduced today, to hear the geography that's represented in this room. And I think it bodes well for the future. So as we look to that future, I'll conclude and open it up for your questions with a couple of hopes and a couple of closing messages. One, we need to constantly remind ourselves that economic development is the ultimate team sport. And at its heart, that's what this network is all about. We all have different roles, and we're each dependent on one another. If any one of us fails to get our particular job done, the process breaks down. And I would submit, in relationship to some of the chatter this week, if we start blurring and confusing those roles and forgetting that local economic developers have a critical role to make the system work, and they can't play the regional role as well. The rooster in the hen house does not work when it comes to economic development. You work closely with your existing business community and your companies to make sure they grow and expand in your area. You know them better than anyone. You're the ones that have to step up to help close each deal, each and every one. Our job at the regional level is to bring deals to the table and to facilitate the process, always being an active advocate of the deal, which means alternatingly representing the region and then the client as the process unfolds, and working on behalf of the region with our partners in economic development in the two states. Our job is to support you on existing business expansions and to make sure the protocol of the network is in place and works when it comes to an existing company that is considering an out-of-market option. There's no better example, and Mark will remember this well, than MasterCard. If you as a network and the elected officials that I referenced before did not have the trust and the framework of this network, the nearly 2,500 MasterCard jobs would be in Dallas right now. They wouldn't be in this region, and they wouldn't be in Winghaven, because that was the absolute epitome of the example of how the network is to happen. Buzz Westfall and the mayor of Maryland Heights, and Mark was very much involved in this, after an exhaustive effort to meet not only their need where they were, where Graybar now has their second facility, but anywhere in the county. We worked with Denny and his team, and the network made this thing happen, because the site consultant and MasterCard had very specific criteria in terms of expansion, the cost, all the parameters. And at the end of the day, we worked hard to find that, not only in Maryland Heights, but even within the county. And Buzz and the mayor signed a letter saying that they supported using state incentives to keep MasterCard in the region, even though it was not going to be in their city where they currently were, or in their county. And there were, I think, 3 sites in St. Charles County, and Winghaven had its own uniquenesses, which also helped sell in terms of a master plan community. That's, and in the final presentation to MasterCard, and some of you weren't around here then, the CEO of MasterCard was this tall drink of water, had a heavy Texas accent, and Jerry McElhatton, great guy. At the end of the day, he made that decision for St. Louis, even though he owned a home in Dallas. He had a home here and a home in Dallas, When I met him the first time, I thought, oh my God, this is really going to be hard. But in that final presentation, we pulled the thing together. This apparatus, as you have come to depend on Steve and Jim and the team here to facilitate that process, we organized our we had final and best offer. Roger Staubach led the presentation in Dallas because he was managing the deal civically, and Mel Carnahan managed ours. And Joe Orfworth, who didn't like the mayor, what was the mayor of O'Fallon's? Huh? No, he didn't like anybody. That's true. But the mayor, Paul, was it? Huh? Renaud, thank you. Paul Renaud and Joe didn't even speak to one another. They sat next to one another and complimented one another in the presentation. And Joe Driscoll, we all remember Joe Driscoll. And that's how the network's supposed to work. So that's my case study as a best practices example. And finally, our job is to raise the profile of the St. Louis region in a way that supports all of the above. The bottom line is we have an interconnected, symbiotic relationship as fellow economic developers. We can't be successful without your good work, and the better we handle our job, the more successful you'll be. It's been a real pleasure working with many of you. Some of you I've not had a chance to work with because you're new, but welcome to your colleagues who have been doing this and making this happen, and I wish you well for the future. And I expect to see a lot of great things happening as a result of the continuing efforts of the people in this room. Thank you very much. Jim says we have some time for questions, and thank you for that warm applause. Having everybody standing reminds me of a story. Dick Lamb had this weird relationship with the media. I mean, he was a really interesting guy, but he had a weird relationship with the media. And they were really at war over something. And he spoke at a press club event, the annual meeting, and he came on. He got up to give the speech, and they were mad about it, and they didn't stand up. And he looked to the side. He said, "Stand up, goddammit!" And the mic was too live. and the headline in the Denver Post was, "Lamb to media, stand up, goddammit!" So thank you for staying. Questions? Yes, Richard.
Dick, you're always a visionary. Give us a little bit more of the vision you have for St. Louis going forward.
Great.
And what we as a network can do to help achieve that vision.
Well, thanks. Richard's question is, what vision might I have for the future? I think the heart of that vision is embodied in the work that this network and the RCGA and the trustees evolved out of the current plan. It's just been done, and kind of a look back to about 10 years worth of experience with the 5 clusters that were identified back in 99. When it's hard to imagine as extraordinary as the work that Dr. Danforth and now the new iteration following the coalition are doing in plant life sciences, that until the original study in 99, the Patel study in 99, we didn't even consider plant life sciences an industry, in spite of all the assets, obviously, that we had here. So I think really drilling down, Richard, in terms of some of the refinements where financial services and information services have sort of married together in terms of the niche and the kind of work that Steve and Danny Ludeman and Tom Voss are going to lead in the very near future of creating these leadership councils to really reverse engineer the supply chains of our CEOs that I don't know if there's nobody here from the media, right? Danny and Jim Webb have agreed to co-chair that. I mean, that's the level of commitment that I think is going to come in women medical, but also look at the one that's emerged. The sustainable technologies one, and I think Jim's going to reference the green print that is going to be announced in a couple of weeks that is kind of paralleling the work that our colleagues are doing in Silicon Valley and Denver and Portland in the Climate Prosperity Project. There's a cluster there that is tremendously opportune for us. And lo and behold, Emerald Automotive proves it. And the fact that we've done this with a national site consultant that specializes in that space as Welford Energy Advisors does, they're going to be back with more. So I think that's, and obviously, please, 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 if you all don't do anything else, get the damn legislature to pass an economic development bill. I mean, it's going to be on Jon Stewart pretty soon as a joke about how Missouri can't pass an economic development bill. And part of that, whether it's literally what we tried to do with Aerotropolis or a variation on it, you know, Steve collaborated with the folks in the network, in the World Trade Center, and Rodney and Tim, and the demand's there. How many companies represent the biggest portion of the demand? 11? 10? 7. And they're, you know, what was on the table in Jeff City for Aerotropolis? I mean, it's like snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. You got to figure out a way to do that. If we screw around with it long enough, somebody else will do it. Because the Chinese need to do it. They don't need it because of us. They need it because of them. And then beyond those sort of issue focuses, I'd encourage this group to go back to the protocols. Look at them fresh. You know, renew your vows, and be real serious with one another. What hasn't worked as well as it could? What's developed since those tenets of the network? We did that in Denver a couple times in the 8 years that the GDC existed, and I know Tom and the network continued to do that. And I'd say continue to, as I said in my remarks, don't mush things together. I mean, I did well in the thing, you know, the mayor's a good guy, but the notion that we could have a regional economic development function done by a merged city and county is just nuts. I mean, it's just silly. And, you know, Denny and Rodney, I know we're putting a lot of good energy into improving how those two jurisdictions do their thing. And there are probably all kinds of reasons that makes sense if it ultimately makes sense to both those jurisdictions. But keep the capacity to do the regional stuff and the capacity to have the strongest possible local economic development you can. I won't do that long on all the questions. Steve.
This will look like a suck up, but it's not. He's gone in 30 days.
He still has his annual review.
First of all, I can't believe that after 7 years there's a single story you've gotten I hadn't heard. And, the first one I had not heard. So it's still a little bit along lines of Richard's question. I'll put it to you 2 different ways. You can answer however you want. One would be if you had a magic wand and there were 1 or 2 things, maybe 2 or 3 things, you don't have that much time, that you could change about the region. What are they? Or if you'd rather answer it, missed opportunities. Missed opportunities.
Right.
Beyond the time, but go beyond, I mean, forgetting for a minute that Aerotropolis.
Okay, because that clearly in the latter question would, I hope it doesn't manifest ultimately as the missed opportunity. I hope 50 years from now they're not saying, would you believe it? They screwed it up in the 1800s and they did it again in 2012. Hopefully that's not. I think if there was, and this is not meant as an ideological or political science statement, and I respect the fact that munis have important roles, counties have important roles, regions have important roles, but if there were some way to take some of the perverse motivation out of the system for our units of local government. I mean, I don't blame an effective municipality for moving the big box retail from one side of the street to the other. They got to do it to survive, but at some point, if you could change the fact that they have to do it, if we, you know, we're not creating new, and Steve Ellman and I have talked about this a lot. He's on a crusade on this, and I think he's got a point. We're not creating net economic gain, but if you're a municipality, you got to do it. So you wave a wand and you change that. There's certainly, as you look around the country, there's certain examples of places that do tax-based sharing, and I know there's versions of it in terms of the tiers and stuff that I guess that the county has negotiated from time to time, but that gets tough to keep that up to date. So you know, the one that everybody talks about is the city and the county. I think that's probably, there's certainly functional reasons why that would make sense. But probably more than anything, it would be great to just get people to stop talking about it and as though it's the biggest problem, because, you know, you and I can't remember in 17 years working with a site consultant or a company where they said, by God, you know, we'd come here, but for the fact that the city and county aren't in the same place. I mean, there's all kind of reasons that the city and county would make sense to be together. There's all kind of history, and, you know, I guess if you read the history book, the city wanted to get rid of the prospect that anything would ever happen outside the city, and, you know, then that reversed. So if I could wave a wand, I'd support the heck out of Steve Ellman bringing the state capitol back to St. Charles. I mean, that 2.5-hour drive each way, I think that, I mean, having done this in Atlanta and in Denver, I think it really does affect the sort of legislative relationship. They can't get away from you when they're there. When you got to drive 5 hours round trip to go see them, I think that affects. You know, in John's area, I think we've done some terrific things with remarkably limited resources in transportation. But if we're going to fulfill on the ultimate, on the multimodal supply chain cluster, not just China, but the whole thing that represents, we're going to have to get really serious about freight infrastructure and multimodal infrastructure, and for all the challenges that our colleagues at MoDOT have you know, they're running out of money just to do the roads and bridges, and we're not even talking about freight. So, and we never even talk about transit in the statewide funding. And what John Nations and his colleagues have done kind of with the loaves and fishes, I cite that statistic. 10 years ago, Pittsburgh was getting $120 million a year for operating funding for their transit system, and it's smaller than Metro. And John, did they get any last year?
Not much.
Not much. I think Illinois puts 18 million in a smaller population portion of the region, Illinois legislature. So I'd wave that one. Any other questions? Yes.
Actually, a comment, if I might.
Sure.
As one of the newer people in the room, and by December 31st, I have to quit saying that currently. And one of the smaller jurisdictions, I want you to know I appreciated the inclusiveness of this group. I worked for a regional chamber in another state and ran something similar to this. And I thought I knew what it was when Jim first asked me to be part of it. And this is a tremendous group. Nobody yet has asked me what high school I attended. And it's really been beneficial to our efforts. So I suspect there are other people in the room that feel that way, but on behalf of those of us that do, I want to thank you for having this opportunity for us.
You're very welcome. And I commend Judy and Jim and Steve and all of you for, I mean, you've really made this into a going enterprise, and I think, as I said, I think it's important to build on it. I think the maestro is about to get up, but thank you all again, and keep up the good work.
Oh, no, we have to have Rodney.
Oh, yeah.
Rodney, you have the floor.
Yes, sir.
Since it's your last question,
Yes, sir.
just talk a little bit about kind of your thoughts about your next steps in life. You know, as you mentioned, you have an interest in philanthropic kind of endeavors. So, you know, what has kind of kept you going and kind of led you to what you're thinking about doing next?
Oh, great, glad to do it. And Rodney, we'll miss you. Thanks for, in fact, I'm going to be with your former boss. We're each getting an award later this month in Washington, Grzywinski, and I'll tell him you said hello. I guess it's from a couple of perspectives. I've always been intrigued from the grantee side. In Atlanta, I first got into understanding the role of foundations. And a short version of the story is we finished the downtown area plan, and it called for taking 4 blocks right in the middle of downtown Atlanta at 5 points, kind of deteriorating Class B buildings, and clearing it and turning it into stair-step fountains and stages in a park. And when we announced the plan, John Portman, the architect, was our chairman. The press kind of guffawed about it and said, "Isn't that silly?" And you know, about 3 months after we announced the plan, my boss said, Beaufilet Jones was the head of the Woodward Foundation, and the Woodward Foundation annually gave $400 million to various things, all in Atlanta, and all anonymously. Everybody knew it was them, but they never claimed credit. Says Beaufilet Jones would like to have a presentation on that park and what it would cost. And we had not gotten anywhere, kind of like I'm sure when you got the call on City Garden, you probably had a lot more detail than we had. So I sat up at my dining room table that night and pulled every number I could pull, and I added about 20% just in case, and I went into the breakfast to meet with him, and I presented it, and I said $16 million to acquire the property and another whatever to do the initial installation, and I didn't think any more about it. A week later, he shows up in a beat-up briefcase, and he comes into Dan Sweat, who was my boss. He comes into Dan's office. He said, "Tell Fleming to get in here." And I went in, and he opened it up, and it was $20 million of Coca-Cola stock being signed over to the city on the condition that they buy the land at such and such and such. So that kind of embedded in my head as a young pup. Foundations are pretty cool. And so after, essentially, you know, when you do this stuff and you have a $10 or $11 million budget, people don't have to fund you every year. You're basically raising $10 million every year. I decided what I'd like to do next is to deal with these issues in some way, or maybe some other issues that I care about but I haven't dealt with professionally, but to do it where you're giving the money. And so my definition of the optimum would be either running a major portfolio. The national foundations, as you know, they're organized that way, where you got the economic development person or the whatever person, the environmental person, either in that frame, or to head a regional foundation that is really focused on that community. And I'd love to be able to stay here. Our girls have grown up here. Sarah loves it here. I'm hoping that if one of those scenarios allows me to get on a plane every week, if I'm doing deals somewhere else anyway, I could do them from anywhere. But I haven't gotten serious about that search because when I started doing that in the spring, it started getting into, well, could you, in 60 days, would you be, and I thought, you know, we're about to go into the special session, and so I just kind of put it on hold until the end of this year. But that's kind of what I hope to do. And I also, careful, guys, I'm going to write. The book is really kind of, it won't be telltale, but just writing about Aerotropolis could be a movie. But I actually I'm going to spend the first quarter of the new year sitting down and try to write about the sort of 3 cities that I've worked in. So, thank you.